When was the last time everything fell apart? Not a bad day, not a rough week. I mean the real thing. The moment the ground you were standing on, the ground you had built your entire life on, the ground you thought was solid, permanent, reliable, just gave way beneath your feet. Beneath your feet. When the phone call came that you were not ready for, when the diagnosis arrived that rearranged everything, when the person you thought would always be there was suddenly, irreversibly gone, when the business failed, the marriage ended, the dream collapsed, the body broke down, the money ran out. When you looked at your life and you did not recognize it, when you looked in the mirror and you did not recognize yourself, when was that moment for you? Because I'm not standing here today to talk to the version of you that has everything figured out. I'm standing here to talk to the version of you that is in the middle of something hard, the version of you that is tired in a way that sleep cannot fix, the version of you that is holding on but barely, the version of you that is still standing, but you are not entirely sure how, and you are not entirely sure for how long. I am standing here today because I know something about that person. And what I know is this. That person, the one who is tired and struggling and barely holding on, that person is not weak. That person is not broken. That person is not behind. That person is in the forge. And the forge is where the strongest metal in existence is made. Or today I want to talk to you about three things. Not strategies, not systems, not a five-step plan. Three qualities, three states of being that when you carry them together, when you embody all three simultaneously, they become the most formidable force a human being can possess. They become a kind of power that the world cannot touch, that circumstances cannot erode, that failure cannot defeat. Be strong, be patient, be calm. This is power. Let us begin. Let me tell you about a woman named Elaine. Elaine was 51 years old when her husband of 23 years told her he was leaving. No warning, no counseling, no conversation that had built toward this, just he was leaving. And 2 weeks later, he was gone, and Elaine was standing in the house they had bought together, raised their children in together, built their entire shared life inside of, and it was just her. Just her and the silence and the particular cruelty of a space that still smelled like the life it used to contain. She lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks because she forgot to eat. She forgot to eat, friends, not because she was dieting. Because grief had reached into her and removed the very instinct for self-preservation. She stopped sleeping. She stopped calling her friends because she was exhausted by the performance of being okay. And she was not okay. And she could not pretend anymore. She sat in her car in parking lots and sobbed so hard she could not breathe, then walked into wherever she was going and smiled at people. Because what else do you do? What else can you do? Her youngest daughter called her one evening, 3 months into this. And she asked her mother, "Mom, how are you getting through this?" And Elaine was quiet for a long time. And then she said something that her daughter told me she thinks about every single day of her life. Elaine said, "Baby, I don't know how I'm getting through it. I just know that I'm not stopping and I'm not screaming. And somehow in between those two things, I'm finding a way. Not stopping, not screaming. In between those two things, strength and patience and a calm that is not the absence of pain but the refusal to be destroyed by it. That is what we are talking about today. Let us start with strength. Because when most people hear the word strength, they picture something specific. They picture a jaw set hard against the wind. They picture fists clenched and teeth gritted and someone powering through obstacles by sheer force of will. They picture the warrior charging forward, the hero who does not bleed, the person who feels nothing and is stopped by nothing and needs nothing and fears nothing. And I'm here to tell you that this picture, this image that our culture has sold us as the definition of strength, is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, completely, dangerously wrong, because that version of strength is not strength. That version is armor. And armor is not the same as strength. Armor is what you wear when you are afraid that your actual self is not strong. Armor is what you put on when you cannot afford for anyone, including yourself, to see what is really happening inside. Armor is heavy. Armor is isolating. Armor worn long enough becomes a prison. And the person inside the prison, protected from everything, connected to nothing, slowly, quietly starves. Real strength. The kind I want to talk to you about today. Real strength is something entirely different. Real strength is the willingness to feel everything and keep moving anyway. Real strength is saying, This is devastatingly hard, and I'm going to do it anyway. Real strength is not the absence of fear. It is action taken in the presence of fear. It is not the absence of pain. It is the decision that pain will inform you but not define you. But not define you. It is not the absence of doubt. It is the voice that speaks louder than doubt, the voice that says, I am still here. I am still trying. I have not given up. Real strength looks like the mother who wakes up at 4 in the morning after sleeping 3 hours because the baby was sick. And she makes breakfast and packs lunches and shows up to work and smiles because her children need her stable. And she is tired to the marrow of her bones, but she shows up. That is strength. Not because she is not exhausted, because she is exhausted and she shows up anyway. Real strength looks like the man who receives a diagnosis that rearranges every plan he has ever made. And he sits with it. He actually sits with the fear and the grief and the rage. And then he calls his family and says, here is what we are dealing with. Here is what we are going to do. Not because he is not afraid, because he is more committed to leading his family than he is consumed by his fear. Real strength looks like the young person who has been told no by the school, by the employer, by the system, by the people who were supposed to believe in them, who has been told no so many times that the no has started to feel like a natural law, like gravity, like a fundamental fact of how the universe operates. And they apply again. They try again. They get up again. Not because they are not discouraged, because somewhere inside them there is a thing that discouragement has not yet reached, a thing that is still burning, still alive, still convinced that their yes is somewhere ahead of them. That is strength, that quiet, stubborn, unkillable refusal to surrender what matters. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the hardest punch, the deepest root. The thing that holds when everything above ground is being stripped away by the storm. Let me ask you something. What is the strongest material in nature? People often say diamond. And diamond is extraordinary. The hardest natural substance on earth, resistant to almost everything. But here is the thing about a diamond. If you hit it at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right force, it shatters. The very hardness that makes it resistant also makes it brittle. Brittle. It cannot flex. It cannot bend. And so it breaks. Now think about a reed, a hollow piece of grass growing by the river. The storm comes and the reed bends almost to the ground, sweeping so low it nearly touches the water. And when the storm passes, the reed rises, stands back up, intact, unbroken. Unbroken. Not because it resisted, but because it yielded without surrendering. Because it had the flexibility to absorb the force without fracturing. The poet Rumi begins his masterpiece, the Masnavi, one of the greatest works of spiritual literature ever written. He begins it with the image of a reed flute cries. It makes music, but the music is made of longing, made of the pain of separation from its origin. And Rumi says, listen to the reed. It has a story to tell. The music it makes, the song of its suffering, is the very thing that allows it to connect with every human heart that has ever suffered. The wound becomes the opening through which meaning pours. Your wounds, the places where life has broken you or bent you or stripped you down, those are not your weaknesses. Those are not the evidence of your failure. Those are the openings. Those are the places where your story connects with someone else's story, where your survival becomes someone else's permission to survive, where your rising becomes the proof that rising is possible for anyone who refuses to stay down. But strength alone is not enough. And this is where most people's understanding of power breaks down completely. Most people think strength is sufficient. They think if they are just strong enough, just determined enough, just testies enough, they will win, they will break through, they will arrive. And what they discover, usually at tremendous cost, is that strength without patience is not power, it is force. And force applied blindly, without timing, without wisdom, without the understanding that some things cannot be rushed. Force creates damage. Force breaks things that did not need to be broken. Force charges through doors that would have opened on their own, had you given them a moment. So let us talk about patience. And I want to start by saying something that I believe with everything I am, something I have had to learn and relearn through my own life, in ways that were sometimes brutal in their teaching. Patience is not passivity. This distinction is everything. This distinction is the difference between a life of wisdom and a life of quiet resignation. Patience is not sitting still while the world moves without you. Patience is not accepting what should not be accepted. Patience is not giving up on the timeline while telling yourself you are being wise. wise. Patience is strategic. Patience is active. Patience is the disciplined understanding that there is a right time for every action, and that acting before that time is not courage. It is impatience dressed up as courage. And impatience dressed up as courage has destroyed more potential and more relationships and more dreams than almost any other force I can name. So think about a farmer. The farmer plants a seed. And here is the part that seems obvious but is profound if you really sit with it. The farmer does not stand over the earth and demand that the seed grow. The farmer does not dig up the seed every 3 days to check on its progress, disturbing the very process he is trying to observe. The farmer does not look at the empty soil after 2 weeks and conclude that the seed has failed, that farming is not for him, that he planted wrong, that the earth has rejected him. The farmer trusts the process. The farmer knows that beneath the surface of what appears to be nothing, everything is happening. The seed is splitting open. The root is reaching down. The shoot is finding its way up through the dark. The farmer cannot see any of this. The farmer has no proof for a period of time that can feel uncomfortably long that anything is happening at all. And the farmer waters the ground anyway, tends the field anyway, protects the soil anyway, because the farmer knows something that the impatient person standing at the fence does not. The farmer knows that growth does not perform for the observer. Growth follows its own schedule, governed by laws deeper than anyone's urgency. And the only thing required of the farmer is consistency and trust. You are a farmer. Everything you are building in your life, everything you are working toward, praying toward, sacrificing toward, it is a seed in the ground. And there will be periods, sometimes long periods, when you cannot see the evidence of progress, when the ground looks empty. When everyone standing at the fence is questioning why you are still tending a field that shows no crop. When your own doubts start to sound reasonable, start to sound wise, start to dress themselves up as realism, and whisper that maybe nothing is growing because nothing was ever planted worth growing. In those moments, patience is not blind faith. Patience is the informed trust of someone who knows the process, who has studied the principles, who has seen enough seasons to understand that winter is not the end of the story. Winter is where the energy retreats below the surface and does its invisible work, preparing for a spring that is coming regardless of whether you believe in it. I think about the story of Viktor Frankl. You may know his name, you may know his book, but I want to tell you what I think is the most extraordinary thing about his story. The thing that goes beyond the philosophy and the psychology and arrives at the raw human miracle of Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Vienna in the 1930s. He was brilliant. He was building a career that promised to matter enormously. He had developed ideas about meaning and human purpose that he believed could help people understand themselves and their suffering in a fundamentally new way. And then the Nazis rose to power too. And Frankl, who was Jewish, was given an opportunity, a visa to America, a chance to escape what was clearly coming. And he faced an agonizing choice. Take the visa and leave his elderly parents behind, people who could not come with him, or he stayed. And what followed was 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz, including Dachau. 3 years of systematic dehumanization, starvation, forced labor, witnessing atrocities that the human mind was never designed to contain. He lost his wife. He lost his father. He lost his mother. He lost almost everything and everyone that had given his life its texture and its meaning. And the manuscript of his ideas that he had been developing for years, the physical document of his life's intellectual work, was taken from him when he arrived at the camps. And Viktor Frankl, in those camps, in those conditions, did something that I believe represents perhaps the highest expression of both patience and strength that any human being has ever demonstrated. He observed, he thought, he continued to develop his ideas, not on paper, but in his mind, in his memory, in the privacy of an inner life that the Nazis could not reach. He helped other prisoners find meaning in their suffering. He found in the most meaningless and cruel circumstances imaginable the stubborn insistence that meaning was possible, that even here, even now, even stripped of everything external, the one freedom that could not be taken was the freedom to choose how he responded to what was happening to him. He survived. He rebuilt his manuscript from memory. He published Man's Search for Meaning, and it went on to become one of the most widely read books in the world. translated into dozens of languages, read by millions of people, touching lives across generations and cultures and circumstances. All of it. Every word of that influence, every life changed by that book. All of it grew from seeds planted in darkness, from patience exercised in conditions where patience should have been impossible, from the decision made in hell that the story was not over. I am not asking you to compare your situation to a concentration camp. He had more authority, more resources, more people dependent on his decisions than almost any human being who has ever lived. And during his reign, he faced almost constant crisis, wars, plagues, economic catastrophe, betrayal from people he had trusted with his life. He dealt with loss that would have broken most people. He dealt with threats that arrived from every direction simultaneously. And throughout all of it, he maintained a practice. Every morning before the empire's demands arrived, he wrote. He wrote to himself, not for publication, not for posterity, just for himself, about how to live, how to lead, how to be a good human being in circumstances that made goodness very difficult. Those writings survived. We call them the meditation. And what strikes me most about them, reading them 2000 years later, is not the profundity of the ideas. Though the ideas are profound, what strikes me is the tone. The tone is calm, not the calm of a man who does not face hard things. The calm of a man who has found something within himself that is deeper than the hard things, who returns to that place daily, deliberately, and from that place makes the decisions that an empire of millions depends on. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Power over your mind, not outside events. And this is exactly what calm is. It is the practical, daily, unglamorous exercise of power over your own mind. Not the world, your mind. The one domain that is actually yours. The one jurisdiction where you are actually sovereign. Most people spend their lives trying to control outside events. They exhaust themselves trying to make other people behave differently, trying to make circumstances cooperate, trying to force outcomes that resist forcing. And they are perpetually frustrated, perpetually anxious, perpetually at the mercy of a world that does not and will not and cannot be made to comply. Because the world is not controllable. The world does what it does. Other people do what they do. Circumstances unfold according to a million variables that have nothing to do with your preferences, but your mind, your response. The story you tell yourself about what is happening and what it means, and what it says about you and what it requires of you, that is yours. Says yours. Entirely, absolutely, irrevocably yours. And the person who has claimed that sovereignty, who has practiced the discipline of choosing their internal response even when they cannot choose their external circumstances, that person has access to a kind of freedom that no one can grant and no one can remove. Let me tell you about something that happened to a man I know. His name is Michael. Michael was a competitive runner, not professionally but seriously. Running was not just his hobby. It was his identity. It was how he processed stress, how he maintained mental health, how he connected with his body and with something larger than his daily life. Running was the through line that held everything else together. At 37 years old, Michael was told he would never run again. A degenerative condition in his hip. The kind of diagnosis that lands in your life like a demolition ball, taking out not just one thing, but the entire network of things that were attached to it. His mood, his sense of self, his community, his coping mechanism, his joy. All of it gone with 3 sentences from a doctor who delivered the news with a practiced sympathy that did not begin to touch the depth of what Michael was feeling. Michael describes the first 6 months after that doses as the darkest period of his life. He could not see the point of things. He gained weight. He withdrew from friends. He stopped taking care of himself in the way that the person who runs 6 miles every morning takes care of himself. He was not just grieving the running. He was grieving the person he was when he ran. He was grieving an identity that had been taken from him by a biological process that had no interest in what it cost. And then, slowly, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small shifts that accumulated over time, he began to find the calm. He began to separate what had been lost from what remained. He began to ask not, what can I not do anymore, but what can I still do? He started swimming. He started cycling. He started mentoring young runners at a local high school, coaching them in a way that drew on everything he knew and loved about the sport without requiring him to do what he could no longer do. He found that the identity he had thought was runner was actually something deeper, something that the running had expressed but had not created. A relationship with discipline, with physical challenge, with community, with the particular joy of pushing a body to its edge and discovering what is on the other side. 3 years after the diagnosis, Michael told me something that I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, I used to think running made me strong, but I was wrong. The running was just the place where I went to practice being strong. The strength was always mine. I just had to find it somewhere else. The strength was always mine. He just had to find it somewhere else. This is what strength and patience and calm make possible. They make possible the discovery that who you are is not located in what you do or what you have or what other people think of you or what your circumstances look like at any given moment. Who you are is located somewhere deeper, in the place where the storm cannot reach. In the depth it is yours, regardless of what the surface looks like. And when you find that place, when you know it, really know it, not as a concept but as lived experience, nothing that happens on the surface can take it from you. But I want to be careful here. Because there is a version of this message that can become an excuse. There is a version of strength, patience, calm that becomes a philosophy of endurance for its own sake. That says, suffer quietly, accept without resistance. Do not disturb the peace by demanding anything different. And I want to be absolutely clear that this is not what I am teaching today. Strength is not silent suffering. Strength speaks clearly, honestly, sometimes loudly, about what is wrong and what needs to change. Strength does not absorb injustice with a serene smile and call it wisdom. Looks at what is unjust and says, this will not continue. Strength is the river that runs deep and moves slow, but if you put a dam in its path, eventually, inevitably, the water goes around it or over it or through it because the river does not stop. It finds a way. Always. Always. Patience is not tolerating the intolerable indefinitely. Patience understands the difference between a situation that requires waiting for the right moment and a situation that requires action now, and the discernment to know which is which. Patience is not apathy. Patience is wisdom about timing, and timing is everything. The same action taken at the wrong moment can destroy what it was meant to build. The same action taken at the right moment can change everything, and calm is not detachment. Calm is not the spiritual bypassing of real feelings, the pretense that everything is fine when everything is not fine, the performance of equanimity as a form of avoidance. Calm feels everything. Calm allows grief and rage and fear their full and honest expression. But calm does not become those things. Calm contains them, the way the riverbank contains the river, not stopping its flow but giving it direction, not blocking the power but channeling it towards something useful. Strength, patience, calm, together, simultaneous. Not three separate qualities you rotate through, but three dimensions of a single way of being in the world. Think of them as the legs of a stool. Remove any one of them and the whole thing falls. Strength without patience is recklessness. It runs headlong into walls and wonders why it is bleeding. Patience without strength is passivity. It waits so long for the right moment that the moment passes and nothing is built. Strength and patience without calm are reactive. They accomplish things but at the cost of enormous collateral damage, leaving a trail of broken relationships and burned out energy in their wake. But all three together, strength that moves, patience that waits for the right moment to move, and calm that chooses the right response regardless of the provocation. This combination is genuinely remarkably, almost impossibly powerful, and it is not power in the way the world usually means powered by. It is not the power that comes from position or money or influence or volume. It is a power that cannot be taken, cannot be threatened, cannot be bought or sold or legislated. It is the power that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being exactly that in every circumstance, under every pressure, through every storm. Let me tell you about pressure. Let me tell you what pressure actually does to things, because I think we have badly misunderstood it. Pressure is not punishment. Pressure is the process. A grape has to be crushed before it becomes wine. Coal has to endure unimaginable geological pressure, millions of years of it, before it becomes a diamond. The pearl forms because a grain of sand, an irritant, an intrusion enters the oyster, and the oyster in response to the pressure and the discomfort of that intrusion, produces layers of nacre around it, beauty produced by and around the wound. And the finest steel is not simply iron left in the ground. It is iron that has been subjected to tremendous heat, folded and hammered and quenched and folded again, the impurities burned away, the structure refined by the very process that looks from the outside like destruction. You are not being destroyed by your pressure. You are being refined by it. And I know that distinction is easy to say from a stage and very hard to believe when you are in the middle of what feels like destruction. I know. I know the difference between the theory of transformation through pressure and the lived experience of pressure that makes you want to stop breathing. I am not minimizing the experience. I am offering you a different frame through which to understand it, but the frame matters. And the story you tell yourself about what is happening to you, that story is not neutral. That story has power. That story either gives you access to your strength or it depletes it. The person who says, "This is happening to destroy me," lives in a very different body with very different neurochemistry, making very different decisions than the person who says, "This is happening to build me. This is the process. This is the forge." Both of them are experiencing the same external circumstances. One of them has found access to something the other has not yet found, not because of personality, not because of luck, because of the frame, because of the story, Suturi, because of the daily, deliberate, sometimes agonizing choice to interpret their experience in a way that gives them power rather than taking it away. And here is what I have seen in my own life and in the lives of the most extraordinary people I have ever been privileged to know. The people who emerge from tremendous difficulty with their humanity intact, with their compassion deepened, with their purpose clarified and their contribution enlarged, they are not the people who were spared the difficulty. They are the people who found the frame, who told themselves a different story, not a denial of the pain, a reinterpretation of its purpose, though pain has a purpose. Your pain has a purpose. Not in some abstract, theoretical greeting card way, in the specific, practical way that scar tissue is stronger than the original skin. In the way that a broken bone properly healed is denser and harder at the break than anywhere else. Your broken places, when you allow them to heal, when you give them the time and care and patience that healing requires, those places become your strongest places, not despite the break. Because of it, let me speak now about something that I think is quietly at the center of everything we are talking about. Something that, once you understand it, changes your relationship with difficulty in a fundamental way. I want to talk about identity. Not your resume, not your roles, not the description you give at parties when someone asks what you do. I mean the deepest thing, the thing underneath all the labels and the titles and the relationships and the accomplishments, the thing that remains when all of those things are removed, the bedrock self, the core, the I am. Because here is what I have observed. When people are struggling, really struggling in the dark, in the forge, what they are most afraid of is not the practical consequences of their situation. It is not the loss of the job or the money or the relationship or the health. It is the threat to their identity. The situation is telling them a story about who they are. The diagnosis says, "You are your illness." The failure says, "You are your failure." The rejection says, "You are what others have decided you are worth." The addiction says, "You are your worst moment repeated." The loss says, "You are what you no longer have." And if you believe those stories, if you allow your circumstances to define your identity, then you are fundamentally vulnerable to every shift in circumstance. And you will spend your life scrambling to control the uncontrollable, terrified of every storm, because every storm is a potential identity crisis. But if you have built your identity on something deeper, on something that circumstances cannot reach, then the storm can take the branches, the storm can even take the visible trunk, and still not reach the root. And from the root, always new growth comes. What is that deeper identity? I cannot tell you what it specifically is for you. That is the work of your own life, your own practice, your own going inward. But I can tell you what it is not. It is not your achievements. It is not your achievements. It is not your reputation. It is not your relationships. It is not your body or your health or your financial status or your intelligence or your talent. All of those things can shift, and many of them will. If your identity lives in those things, you will be periodically shattered when they shift. Your deepest identity is your aliveness, your capacity for love, Your ability to choose, even in the most constrained circumstances, how you respond to what is in front of you, your connection to something, call it what you will, that is larger than the individual story of your particular life. Your fundamental worth as a being who is here, who is present, who is capable of both suffering and joy, who can hold both in the same hands without dropping either. This is what strength is rooted in. This is what patience trusts, and this is what calm protects. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with an old man on a bench outside a hospital. I was visiting someone I loved who was very ill, and I stepped outside because I needed air, because the fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell and the weight of fear inside that building had become more than I could breathe through. And there was an old man on a bench, 80 something years old, small and white haired and utterly still, watching the parking lot with an expression of complete serenity that seemed almost otherworldly given where we were. I sat down near him, and after a while I asked, not really expecting much, "How are you doing?" And he looked at me for a moment, really looked at me, the way old people sometimes do when they have stopped worrying about social performance and have started simply seeing. And he said, "I'm doing the only thing I know how to do. I'm here and I'm quiet, and I'm waiting to see what happens next. Here and quiet and waiting to see what happens next." Thought about that for years. There was no anxiety in those words, no resignation either. Just a complete grounded presence in the reality of the moment, combined with an openness about the future that was neither dread nor blind optimism. Just here, quiet, waiting. This is what calm actually looks like in its fullest expression. It does not look like someone who has no reason to be afraid. It looks like someone who has found something deeper than their fear and lives from that place. The old man had lived through things I could only guess at. Born in a decade of war and poverty, come of age in a world that was constantly threatening to come apart. He had buried people. He had failed at things. He had been afraid and heartbroken and disappointed and lost. And at 80 something, sitting on a bench outside a hospital, he had found the bench. He had found the quiet. He had found the waiting. And in all of that, there was a dignity, a power that no storm had managed to take. Friends, I want to talk to you about the world we live in right now, because I think it is important to understand the specific pressures of this moment in history and why strength and patience and calm are not just personal virtues but acts of resistance, necessary, courageous, countercultural acts of resistance against the specific madness of our time. We live in a world designed to make you reactive, algorithmically, systematically. With brilliant engineering and enormous financial incentive, the world we inhabit has been optimized for reactivity. Every notification is designed to interrupt. Every headline is designed to provoke. Every social media platform is engineered to trigger your fear, your anger, your outrage, your comparison, your envy, your validation seeking. Because those emotional states keep you engaged, and engagement is the currency, the system does not want you calm. The system profits from your anxiety. The system is fed by your reactivity. So choosing calm genuinely, deliberately choosing to not be jerked around by every provocation, to not react to every piece of information that is designed to make you react, is not a passive choice. It is an act of profound self-determination. It is reclaiming territory. It is saying to a system that depends on your reactivity, "You do not own me. I choose my response. I am not a lever to be pulled." And choosing patience in a world that celebrates instantaneous gratification, in a world where you can have almost anything delivered to your door in hours, where responses to messages are expected in minutes. Are they? Where cultural attention spans have shrunk to seconds. Choosing to build something slowly, to invest in something that will not pay off this week or this month or maybe this year. To stay committed to a process that the people around you cannot always see or understand, this too is an act of resistance. It is the declaration that you are playing a different game, a longer game. A game whose metrics are depth and meaning and genuine contribution rather than speed and virality and the dopamine hit of instant results. And choosing strength in the specific way I have described it, not the armor of pretending everything is fine, not the performance of invulnerability, but the genuine, vulnerable, courageous strength of a person who feels everything and keeps going anyway. This is perhaps the most countercultural act of all in a world that pathologizes difficulty and markets escape from pain. There is a pill for your anxiety, and an app for your loneliness, and a subscription for your boredom, and a procedure for your physical imperfections. The message is you should not have to feel this. You should not have to be uncomfortable. Discomfort is a problem to be solved, not a process to be honored. And I understand the compassion behind that impulse, the genuine desire to reduce suffering. But strength is forged in the experience of difficulty, not in its avoidance. And a culture that never allows people to develop genuine strength by working through genuine difficulty. That culture produces people who are more comfortable but less capable, more entertained but less alive, more distracted but less present, more temporarily soothed but less deeply well. Oh, you are choosing something different by being here, by staying with this conversation, by being willing to sit with the hard truth that the power you are looking for is not outside you, not in a different circumstance, not available for purchase or download or delivery. It is inside you. It has always been inside you, and it is accessed not by comfort, but by use, not by avoiding the difficult, but by moving through it, with strength, with patience, with calm. Let me tell you about one more person. And this one is the story I have been building toward all day. Her name was Harriet. And you may think you know this story, but stay with me because I want you to see it differently today. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery. She never knew her exact birthday because when you are property, your birth is not recorded the way a person's birth is recorded. She grew up watching her family members sold away from her, one by one, the people she loved disappearing into a system designed to erase the very concept of their humanity. She had a severe brain injury as a teenager, hit in the head with a 2-pound metal weight by an overseer when she refused to help restrain another enslaved person who was trying to escape. That injury caused narcoleptic episodes for the rest of her life, sudden uncontrollable periods of unconsciousness that she could neither predict nor prevent. So, born enslaved, family taken from her. Severe brain injury, narcolepsy, no education, no money, no legal rights, no protection. By every external measure, this person had nothing, less than nothing. This person, by every external measure, was powerless. And yet, in 1849, Harriet Tubman escaped alone through unfamiliar wilderness, using the North Star, traveling at night, hiding during the day, with no map and no guide and no certainty of anything except that she would rather die free than live enslaved. She made it to Philadelphia. She made it to freedom. And in Philadelphia, in freedom, with everything she had ever dreamed of finally within her reach, she turned around. She went back, not once, 13 times. 13 missions back into the most dangerous territory on the continent for a person in her position. And she brought out over 70 people, 70 human beings who might otherwise have lived and died in bondage. She did this while suffering narcoleptic episodes, which meant that at any moment, in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable, she might simply lose consciousness. She did this with a bounty on her head that grew to the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money. She did this under threat of the most severe consequences imaginable if she was caught, and she never lost a passenger. Not one. Not one of the 70 people who trusted her with their lives ever failed to arrive at freedom. Because Harriet Tubman's hand did not let go. Because when the way became uncertain, she kept going. Because when the fear was overwhelming, she was calm. Because when the journey was longer and harder than anyone expected, she was patient. Because when every rational calculation said turn back, she was strong out of the Civil War. After slavery was abolished, after she had already spent decades giving everything she had, Harriet Tubman did not rest. She became active in the women's suffrage movement. She cared for elderly Black Americans who had been freed but had nothing. She worked until she was in her 90s. She died at over 90 years old, having given more to others than most people could give in 10 lifetimes, having come from less than most of us can imagine. On her deathbed, surrounded by friends and family, her last words were, "I go to prepare a place for you." Still giving, still thinking of others, still moving forward even at the last. That is strength, that is patience, that is calm, not as three separate qualities. As one magnificent, integrated, indomitable human force, that is power, the real kind. The kind that changes the world not because it has access to resources and position and privilege, but because it has access to something deeper, something that cannot be bought or taken or destroyed. Something that lives in the place below the storm's reach, in the depth where the water is always still and always moving and always finding a way now. I want to spend our last time together talking about you. Specifically, the person you actually are in the actual circumstances of your actual life. Because everything I have said today, every story, every principle, every metaphor, it is worth nothing if it stays abstract. It is worth nothing if you leave here moved and inspired and then go back to the same way of responding to your life that you have always had. The only thing that makes this conversation worth having is if something in it lands in you and takes root and changes something real. So let me ask you, what is the storm in your life right now? What is the thing that is testing whether you have access to genuine strength? Not the performed strength, not the armor, but the real thing. The willingness to feel it all and keep moving anyway. And where in your life is impatience costing you? Where are you forcing something that needs to grow at its own pace? Where are you making decisions from urgency that would be better made from wisdom? Where is the seed that needs more time in the dark before it can break the surface? And where have you lost your calm? Where has the storm of circumstance reached all the way down and taken your depth from you, your stillness, your access to the place that is yours regardless of what is happening at the surface? What would it mean to find that depth again? Not to stop feeling the storm, but to have something to stand on that the storm cannot take. I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for practice, because this strength, patience, calm is not an achievement. It is a practice, a daily, imperfect, repeated return to who you have decided to be. Some days you will be strong and patient and calm, and you will feel the power of those qualities moving through your life in ways that are palpable and extraordinary. And some days you will be reactive and impatient and anxious, and you will feel like everything you thought you were building has crumbled, and you will have to begin again. And that beginning again, that honest, humble, undramatic return to your practice, that is perhaps the most important expression of strength that there is, because falling is not failing. Falling is part of the process. Every person who has ever built anything worth building has fallen, has lost the calm, has cracked under the pressure, has given in to the impatience, has chosen the armor over the truth, has had days, maybe long stretches of days, when nothing they believed about themselves seemed accessible. The question is not whether you fall. The question is whether you get up. The question after that is what you do differently when you get up. Whether you learned something from the falling that makes the next standing more grounded, more genuine, more rooted than the last. And I want to say something to the people who are in the process of getting up right now, who have fallen, maybe recently, maybe a long time ago, maybe so many times that the getting up has started to feel like its own kind of exhaustion. I want to say, I see you. What you're doing takes courage. Courage, real courage. The kind nobody cheers for because it is invisible. The kind that happens in the quiet of early morning before the world wakes up. The kind that is made of 1,000 small decisions that look like nothing from the outside, but are actually everything from the inside. You are not behind. You are exactly where your story requires you to be at this moment. And this moment, hard and uncertain and unfair as it may be, this moment contains the seed of something that cannot exist in any other moment. The specific lesson, the specific growth, the specific deepening that only this particular forge can produce in you. You are not wasting time by being in this. You are being made by it, not destroyed. Made.be strong in the real way, the way that feels everything and keeps going. The way that does not need the armor because it trusts the core. The way that is rooted so deeply in who you actually are that no storm can uproot it. Because the roots go down to a place where storms do not reach. Be patient in the wise way. The way that knows the difference between waiting and giving up. The way that tends the field even when the field looks empty. The way that trusts the process not because it is naive about how hard the process is, but because it has studied enough seasons to know that winter is always followed by spring, without exception, without negotiation, without failure. Always. Be calm in the deep way. Not the surface way, not the performance way, not the pretending everything is fine way. The way that finds the depth below the storm. The way that feels everything and is governed by nothing except the choice made in freedom about who you are and how you will respond. The way that gives you access in every circumstance to your best self. The most loving, most wise, most effective version of what you can be for yourself and for the people who need you.